The moment it happened, the room went completely still. 43 homeowners sat in folding chairs inside the Whispering Pines Community Center, a low-ceilinged room that smelled of burnt coffee and old carpet. It was a Wednesday night in March of 2019, and the fluorescent lights above hummed with the particular patience of something that had witnessed too many arguments. At the front of the room stood a man named Darian Cole. 31 years old, Stanford MBA, co-founder of a venture-backed data analytics company. 6'2", in a slim-cut charcoal blazer over a $280 t-shirt, holding a wireless presentation clicker like it was a scepter. And he was laughing. Not a polite laugh, not an uncomfortable laugh. A real, genuine, head-back laugh directed at the man in the second row who had just, very quietly, very calmly, raised his hand to speak. That man's name was Edmund Gaines. He was 74 years old. He wore a hearing aid in his left ear, and his right leg, the one that had been rebuilt twice with titanium and surgical wire after a mortar round in QU letter 1EA3 NGTR letter 1ECB province in 1969, rested at an angle that anyone who knew about nerve damage would recognize immediately. Edmund had asked a simple question about the proposed fence easement, and Darian Cole laughed at him. "Sir," Darian said, wiping the corner of his eye, "with all due respect, can you even hear what I'm saying?" The room did not laugh with him. And then the doors to the community center opened. Let me tell you about Whispering Pines. It sits on the eastern edge of Dunmore, Virginia, a small city tucked into Shenandoah Valley country, where the Blue Ridge Mountains catch the morning light at an angle that makes everything look like it was painted by someone who loved the world. Population around 18,000. The kind of place where people still wave from their driveways, where the 4th of July parade shuts down Main Street for 2.5 hours, and where the local diner has served the same chicken biscuit recipe since 1974. Whispering Pines itself was a planned neighborhood built in 1988. 47 homes arranged along 3 curving streets, Sycamore Lane, Blue Ridge Court, and Heritage Drive, all framing a small man-made pond at the center that the neighborhood kids called the lake, capital T, capital L, with complete sincerity. The houses were modest, colonial style, brick fronts, 2-car garages, deep lots with mature oak trees that dropped acorns every fall like small brown arguments. Most of the homes had American flags out front. Several had service stars in the windows. This was that kind of neighborhood. In the summer, the smell of cut grass moved through the streets like it owned the place. Sprinklers ran at 6 in the morning with a sound like soft applause. In October, somebody always organized a leaf cleanup. In December, the streetlights were strung with white lights by volunteers who showed up every year without being asked. It was not a perfect neighborhood, no neighborhood is. But it was a good one. And for 22 years, from the summer of 1997 until the fall of 2018, the house at 14 Sycamore Lane had been part of what made it that way. Edmund Raymond Gaines. Master Sergeant, United States Army, retired, 23 years of service, 1967 to 1990. He grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, 4th of 6 children, son of a furniture maker and a schoolteacher. He joined the Army at 19, the same month his high school girlfriend became his wife. He shipped to Vietnam in January of 1968, 3 weeks before the Tet Offensive changed everything anyone thought they knew about that war. He served 2 tours, with the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry in the Ia Drang Valley and later in QU letter 1EA3 NGTR letter 1ECB province. He was awarded 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, the leg, the titanium, the nerve damage, and a commendation for valor during a river crossing in 1969 that saved the lives of 4 men in his unit, including a 20-year-old private from Biloxi, Mississippi, who went on to become a pediatric surgeon in Memphis. After Vietnam, Edmund stayed in. He served through the drawdown years, through the Cold War tensions, through Desert Storm, where he coordinated logistics for the 101st Airborne's famous left hook. He retired in 1990 as a master sergeant with a commendation from his commanding general that used the word irreplaceable without irony. He moved to Whispering Pines in 1997 with his wife, Dorothy, a nurse who had a gift for African violets and a laugh that you could hear 3 houses down. They raised their youngest daughter, Camille, in that house on Sycamore Lane. They hosted July 4th barbecues that became neighborhood institutions. Dorothy made sweet potato pie that people started requesting by November. Dorothy died of ovarian cancer in 2014. Edmund stayed. Because that's what Edmund did, he stayed. He was a man built for endurance, not escape. He kept the house, he kept the garden Dorothy had started. He kept the African violets on the kitchen windowsill, even though he'd had to learn to water them from scratch because she'd never had time to teach him and he'd never thought he'd need to know. He had a small woodworking shop in the garage, hand tools mostly, a few power saws, the smell of cedar and linseed oil. He made birdhouses that he gave away. He made small tables that neighborhood kids used in their bedrooms. He was teaching himself to make Windsor chairs from a book Dorothy had given him for Christmas in 2012. He had a dog, a 7-year-old beagle named Sergeant, yes, Sergeant, who slept at his feet every evening while Edmund read history books in his worn leather recliner. He walked with a cane some days, not every day. On cold mornings, the leg was worse. He never complained about it. He never talked about Vietnam unless someone asked, and even then, he said less than he knew. He was not a loud man. He was not a dramatic man. But every family on Sycamore Lane knew his name, and every child on the street had, at some point, helped him carry something from his truck, or had received a birdhouse, or had stood in his driveway and listened to him explain the difference between a dovetail joint and a box joint, with the patience of a man who understood that everything worth knowing takes time. That was Edmund Gaines. Now let me tell you about his new neighbor. The house at 16 Sycamore Lane, directly next door to Edmund's, had been empty since October of 2018. The Marchetti family had lived there for 11 years. Good people. Retired schoolteacher, her husband who coached Little League. They moved to be closer to their grandchildren in Charlotte, and they'd hugged Edmund on the driveway when the moving truck came, and Margaret Marchetti had cried a little, and Edmund had pressed a birdhouse into her hands because he didn't know what else to do with emotion. The house sold in December. The new owner arrived on a Thursday morning in February of 2019, during a cold snap that had driven the temperature in Dunmore down to 23 degrees. The moving truck was a premium white Carrier, the kind with climate control. Behind it came a pearl-white 2019 Cadillac Escalade ESV with Virginia vanity plates that read, COLETK. His name was Darian Marcus Cole. 31 years old, born in Fairfax, Virginia. Graduated Stanford 2011, Stanford MBA 2013. Co-founder and CEO of a company called Praxis Data Group, which described itself on its website as a behavioral intelligence platform for enterprise-scale customer engagement optimization. In plain English, they collected and sold user data. The company had received $34 million in Series B funding in 2017 and had appeared in 3 different Forbes lists in the same calendar year. Darian Cole had purchased the house at 16 Sycamore Lane for $487,000, roughly $90,000 over asking, in what his real estate agent had described to another agent who mentioned it to their spouse, who mentioned it at book club, as the most aggressive offer I've seen in Dunmore in 15 years. He'd paid cash. The movers were inside before 10 in the morning. Expensive furniture. A sectional sofa the color of old bone, a standing desk, 3 monitors, a Peloton, a wine refrigerator, a record player, the ornamental kind that young men who don't listen to records buy to say something about themselves. Edmund was in his garage that morning working on a chair leg when he heard the truck. He walked out to the driveway. He saw Darian stepping out of the Escalade in jogger pants and an expensive puffer jacket. He raised his hand. "Morning," Edmund said. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Name's Edmund Gaines. I'm right next door." Darian Cole glanced at him, took in the cane, the hearing aid, the work-worn hands, the flannel shirt. "Yeah," he said. He looked back at the movers. "Hey, careful with that credenza, it's walnut." He went inside without another word. Now let me be fair, maybe Darian Cole was distracted. Moving is stressful. People have bad mornings. But Edmund had lived long enough, had served long enough to know the difference between a man who was distracted and a man who had already decided you weren't worth his attention. He went back inside, fed Sergeant his morning biscuit, watered Dorothy's African violets. He made a mental note. The first real problem came 3 weeks later. Darian Cole worked from home, which meant in practice that he held video calls at all hours, that he had grocery and meal kit deliveries arriving on a schedule that seemed designed specifically to conflict with every parking arrangement on a street where driveways were short and the curb was shared. His Escalade, all 19 feet of it, had a habit of parking at an angle that blocked the access to Edmund's mailbox. Not completely, but enough that the mail carrier had to lean out at an uncomfortable angle and on one occasion simply didn't deliver. Edmund knocked on Darian's door on a Tuesday morning in March, a gray morning, cold enough that his breath made clouds. Darian answered in a robe, one earbud in. He was clearly on a call. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Edmund said. "Wanted to flag something quick. Your car's sitting just far enough forward that my mail carrier had trouble getting to my box yesterday. If you could back it up just a foot or so." Darian looked at him, then looked at the street, then back at Edmund. "I'm in the public right-of-way," he said. "I'm legally allowed to park there." "You are," Edmund agreed, "just asking as a courtesy, neighbor to neighbor." "I'll keep that in mind," Darian said. He closed the door. "Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever tried to be completely reasonable with someone who has already decided that reason doesn't apply to them? Someone who heard your request and immediately calculated not whether it was fair, but whether they were legally required to comply? If you've had that experience, drop a comment right now and tell me about it. Because I guarantee you that Edmund Gaines, standing on that porch in the cold, watching that door close, felt something that every single one of you has felt. He didn't rage about it, he didn't curse. He walked back to his house, poured a cup of coffee, sat in Dorothy's old chair at the kitchen table, and opened a fresh composition notebook. He wrote the date, the time, a description of the interaction, one factual sentence. He'd kept notebooks like this before. In the Army, documentation was doctrine. You wrote things down not because you expected to need them, but because the moment you stopped writing things down was usually the moment you needed them most. He put the notebook in the kitchen drawer. He made another mental note. Spring came early to Dunmore that year, and with it, Darian Cole came fully alive as a neighbor. The music started in April. Not loud by the standards of a college dormitory, but loud by the standards of 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, loud enough that Edmund, whose hearing aid was out and whose sleep was already fragile, could feel the bass through the shared fence line. He called the non-emergency police line twice. Officers came, spoke to Darian, the music went down. For a night, then it crept back. In May, Darian hired a landscaping company to redo his front lawn with artificial turf, the kind with a suspicious bright green that looked, as one of Edmund's neighbors put it, like someone photoshopped the ground. The installation company parked a flatbed truck across Edmund's driveway for 4 hours without asking. When Edmund walked over, the foreman shrugged and said the homeowner said it would be fine. In June, the first HOA complaint arrived. Edmund received a formal notice from the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, which, it should be noted, Edmund had served on the board of for 6 years prior to Dorothy's illness, informing him that his wood shop, specifically the storage of commercial-grade lumber materials visible from the street, was in potential violation of Section 7.4 of the neighborhood CCRs regarding commercial activity in residential structures. Edmund had never sold a single birdhouse. He gave them away. He knew who'd filed the complaint. He wrote it in the notebook, date, time, content of the notice, his response. In July, Sergeant came home bleeding. Not badly, a surface cut along his left flank, the kind that suggested barbed wire or a sharp fence edge. Edmund cleaned the wound, took Sergeant to the vet, Dr. Allison Price at Blue Ridge Animal Care, $214 for the visit, and walked the fence line between his property and Darian's. There, along the bottom rail of Darian's newly installed cedar privacy fence, he found 3 places where new staples had been added to an existing wire screen, staples driven at an outward angle like small teeth. You wouldn't notice them unless you were looking. A small dog, though, pressing through a gap in pursuit of a scent, would find them immediately. Edmund photographed each one. He photographed Sergeant's wound. He photographed the fence line with a measuring tape knotting the exact location of each staple. He dated and labeled the photos and uploaded them to a cloud folder he'd set up in April with the help of his daughter Camille, who worked in it and had insisted after the first complaint that he start doing this digitally. He wrote it in the notebook. He did not confront Darian. He bought a small roll of protective wire mesh and covered the gap himself, then paid a fencing contractor to inspect the full shared line and certify in writing that it was sound. He put that document in a folder. The folder was getting thick. Direct hit. Now let me ask you something. A lot of people, and I understand this, a lot of people would have snapped by now, would have gone over that fence, would have said things they couldn't take back, maybe worse. But there's something about a man who spent years in a combat zone that changes his relationship with patients. Edmund had waited in worse conditions for worse reasons. He understood that the enemy, and he didn't use that word lightly, the enemy always reveals themselves completely if you give them enough time. He was giving Darian Cole all the time he needed. Dorothy's rose garden was along the south side of the house. She'd planted it in 1998. 7 bushes, a mix of climbing roses and hybrid teas in deep pink and ivory, arranged along a low stone border that Edmund had built himself from fieldstone he'd collected over 3 weekends. Dorothy had a name for each bush. She kept a small laminated card in a kitchen drawer with the Latin cultivar names, because she said knowing something's real name was the beginning of caring for it properly. After she died, Edmund had kept every bush alive. He'd learned which ones needed more water, which ones attracted aphids in August, which ones needed their canes cut back harder in the fall. He'd made mistakes and corrected them. He lost one bush, the Queen Elizabeth climbing rose, second from the left to black spot in 2016, and he'd driven 45 minutes to a specialty nursery in Waynesboro to find the correct replacement. He wasn't a gardener, he was a keeper. On the morning of August 14, 2019, a Wednesday, hot and clear, the kind of August morning that smells like dry earth and lawn clippings, Edmund walked out his back door at 6:15 a.m. to water Dorothy's roses. All 7 bushes had been cut to the ground. Not trimmed, not damaged, cut cleanly at the base with what a landscaping expert later confirmed were bypass pruning shears. The cuts were fresh. The soil was disturbed in a narrow strip, the kind of disturbance consistent with someone kneeling at each plant in sequence. Edmund stood there for a long time. He did not call out, he did not go to Darian's house, he did not make a sound. He went inside, he sat in his kitchen chair, he put both hands flat on the table. After a while he got up, he got his phone, he called Camille. "The roses," he said. There was a pause. "Dad," Camille said, "are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said. Another pause. "I'm fine," he said again. "I just need you to come over and help me document something." He went back outside. He photographed each cut stem. He photographed the soil disturbance. He walked to his exterior camera system. He'd installed a full perimeter system in June, 4 cameras, 4K resolution, motion activated, and pulled the overnight footage. The footage showed at 3:47 a.m. a figure in dark clothing and a baseball cap stepping through a gap in the shared fence and moving, unhurried and deliberate, down the rose garden with a pair of shears. The figure was careful to keep their face angled away. But the shoes were distinctive. Olive green all birds wool runners, limited edition colorway from 2019. Edmund's camera had captured them in sharp detail. He'd seen those shoes on Darian Cole's feet at the HOA meeting in May. He watched the footage once. Then he closed the laptop, he poured himself a cup of coffee, he went to his recliner, he put Sergeant up on the ottoman beside him, he sat. He didn't say anything, he didn't do anything. He just nodded, like something had been confirmed that he already knew. He went inside, he closed the door. If you think Edmund Gaines is going to let this go, you've never met a man like Edmund Gaines. Here is what Darian Cole did not know. He did not know that Edmund Gaines, after returning from Vietnam, had spent 2 years at Georgetown University on a military scholarship, studying pre-law. He did not know that Edmund had served for 7 years in the middle of his Army career as a paralegal specialist attached to a Judge Advocate General Unit, the legal arm of the United States military. He did not know that Edmund had assisted in dozens of military investigations, that he understood evidentiary standards, chain of custody, and the anatomy of a civil case the way most people understand the routes to work. He did not know that Edmund's best friend from his service years, a man named Calvin Reese, with whom Edmund had served in Desert Storm, was a recently retired special agent in charge with the FBI's Richmond field office, who now worked as a private investigator and legal consultant, and who golfed with 3 federal judges. He did not know that the fence Darian Cole had installed along the south property line, the same fence where Sargent had been cut, had been built 4.5 inches over the property line on Edmund's land, a fact that Edmund had confirmed with a licensed surveyor in June and documented in a notarized survey report that was sitting in the thick folder in his kitchen. He did not know that Edmund had filed a formal animal cruelty complaint with the Rockingham County Sheriff's Office in July, complete with the vet report, the photographic evidence, and a written statement, a complaint that had been assigned a case number and was sitting in a queue. He did not know that Edmund had called Calvin Reese on the morning of August 14th, after Camille left with copies of all the documentation, and had spent 45 minutes on the phone describing, calmly and in sequence, every incident since February. He did not know that Calvin Reese had, by the end of that phone call, already made 2 calls of his own. And he did not know, this is the one that matters, he did not know that Praxis Data Group, his company, the $34 million venture-backed company with the 3 Forbes mentions, had been under a Federal Trade Commission investigation since January of 2019 for alleged violations of federal consumer privacy law. Specifically for collecting, aggregating, and selling behavioral data on minors, users under 13, without parental consent, in possible violation of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, known as COPPA. The FTC investigation was not public. It had been triggered by a complaint from a privacy advocacy nonprofit in December 2018. Praxis Data Group's legal team had received an investigative inquiry in February. They had not disclosed this to their investors. This, too, was a problem, a different kind of problem, the kind that federal prosecutors describe with words like securities fraud and material omission. Edmund Gaines did not know all of this on August 14th. But Calvin Reese, who had spent 30 years knowing how to find things, learned most of it within a week. Let me pause here and tell you something about men like Edmund Gaines. They do not plan revenge in the dramatic way you see in movies. They don't sit in dark rooms with string boards and push pins. They document, they organize, they wait. And when the time comes, they don't swing, they simply hand the ammunition to the people who are paid to use it. That is exactly what happened. The HOA meeting was scheduled for March 4, 2020. Edmund marked the date in his notebook. He put on his best flannel shirt. He drove to the community center in his 2009 Ford F-150, the one with the veteran license plate and the small crack in the windshield that he kept meaning to fix. He arrived early. He sat in the second row. He brought the folder. The meeting was called to order at 7:00 p.m. by HOA President Rhonda Tillman, a retired postal worker who ran the meetings with the particular efficiency of someone who has seen too many go sideways. Agenda Item 1, Parking Regulations on Sycamore Lane. Agenda Item 2, a proposed expansion of the neighborhood pond aeration system. Agenda Item 3, New Business, submitted by Darian Cole of 16 Sycamore Lane regarding what he'd titled Residential Aesthetic Compliance Standards, a proposal essentially to require that all visible yard structures, including artisan craft storage facilities, meaning Edmund's woodshop, be enclosed or removed. 43 neighbors were present, standing room only, which was unusual for Whispering Pines HOA meetings in the best of times. Darian Cole stood at the front of the room with his wireless presentation clicker and a PowerPoint, 12 slides, professional design, logo of Sycamore Lane rendered in a sans serif font he'd probably paid someone to create. He was, by every account of every person in that room, deeply pleased with himself. He presented his proposal with the confidence of a man who had spent his professional life in rooms where he was the smartest person present and had never been corrected about it. He used words like scalable aesthetic frameworks and property value optimization. He showed a slide with a photograph of Edmund's woodshop, taken, it appeared from above, which suggested a drone, which was its own legal issue, and labeled it non-compliant exterior storage structure. He talked for 11 minutes. And then Rhonda Tillman said, "Thank you, Mr. Cole. Is there anyone who'd like to respond?" Edmund raised his hand. He rose slowly, the cane, the leg, the hearing aid catching the light. "Mr. Gaines," Rhonda said, "please go ahead." Edmund opened the folder on his chair. He took out a single sheet of paper. "I have a few things," he said. His voice was quiet. The room leaned in. And then Darian Cole laughed. That head-back, genuine, real laugh directed at Edmund, at the cane, at the 11 minutes he just spent presenting and the nerve of this old man responding. "Sir," Darian said, "with all due respect, can you even hear what I'm saying?" The room did not breathe. Edmund looked at him, not with anger, with the specific, measured expression of a man who has been waiting for a moment and is now watching it arrive exactly as predicted. "I can hear just fine," Edmund said. And then the doors to the community center opened. 3 men and 1 woman entered in the sequence that people trained in law enforcement develop over years, not dramatic, not loud, but with a particular purposefulness that empties a room of its ambient noise the way a barometric drop empties a sky of birds. 2 of them were special agents of the Federal Trade Commission, Office of Inspector General. Their credentials were on lanyards. 1 of them was a Rockingham County Sheriff's deputy, there to serve civil process documents. The 4th was a licensed surveyor, a woman named Janet Cole, carrying a rolled document in her left hand. One of the FTC agents walked to the front of the room. He was about 40, dark suit, the kind of contained professional calm that made Darian Cole go completely still. "Mr. Cole," the agent said, "Darian Marcus Cole." "Silence." "Yes," Darian said. The clicker in his hand made a small, involuntary click. "We have documents for you, if you could step outside with us." Darian Cole looked at the room. 43 neighbors looked back at him. "What kind of documents?" he said. His voice was different now, flatter. "The kind we serve in person," the agent said. The sheriff's deputy stepped forward and handed Darian a thick envelope, the civil complaint which had been filed that morning in the Western District of Virginia Federal Court by the Federal Trade Commission against Praxis Data Group and its officers, including Darian Marcus Cole, CEO. The complaint alleged violations of COPPA, fraudulent omission of material information from investor disclosures, and added 2 weeks prior after Calvin Reese's conversation with a former colleague in the FTC's Bureau of Consumer Protection, a specific count related to the unauthorized use of aerial surveillance technology, specifically a consumer drone, over private residential property. The drone photo in Darian's PowerPoint, currently displayed on the screen at the front of the HOA meeting room, was Exhibit A. The surveyor, Janet Cole, handed Rhonda Tillman a certified copy of the boundary survey of 16 Sycamore Lane, which confirmed that the cedar privacy fence installed by Darian Cole in May of 2019 encroached 4.6 inches onto the property at 14 Sycamore Lane, the legally recorded property of Edmund Raymond Gaines. A separate civil complaint, filed by Edmund with representation from a Charlottesville law firm specializing in property rights, was included in the deputy's envelope. It sought the removal of the fence at Darian's expense, damages for the destroyed rose garden, damages for the documented animal cruelty, and legal fees. The total amount sought $312,000. Darian Cole stood at the front of the room, holding the envelope in front of his PowerPoint slide that still showed a photograph of his neighbor's woodshop, labeled non-compliant exterior storage structure. Edmund had not moved from his chair. He had not stood up to watch. He had not said a word since the doors opened. He was looking at the single sheet of paper he'd taken out of his folder. It was, if you looked closely, a photograph, Dorothy's rose garden in full bloom from the summer of 2013, 7 bushes, deep pink and ivory. He had brought it so he would remember why he was there. He put it back in the folder, he closed it. He sat in the second row and waited for the meeting to conclude. Darian Cole left the room with the federal agents at 7:26 p.m. He did not take his PowerPoint clicker. March in Dunmore is the season of everything waiting. The trees are almost bare, the mornings come in cold and quiet. The neighborhood was very quiet in the days after the HOA meeting. People talked, of course. This is a neighborhood, people talk. But not loudly, not with the self-congratulation you might expect, because what they had witnessed was not a triumph exactly, or not just a triumph. What they had witnessed was a reckoning, and reckonings carry a weight that celebration can't quite lift. Darian Cole did not appear at his front door for 6 days. When he did, he was on a phone call. He walked to his car, got in, and drove away. He did not look at Edmund's house. 2 weeks later, a white Cadillac Escalade was parked in the driveway of 16 Sycamore Lane for the last time. A property management company arrived the following Monday, then a real estate agent, then a lockbox appeared on the front door. Nobody on Sycamore Lane organized a farewell. Nobody brought cookies. Nobody stood in the driveway and waved. The artificial turf remained. The HOA voted to require its removal at the following month's meeting, citing Section 9.2 of the CCRs, and was pulled up by a landscaping crew in April. The cedar fence came down 6 weeks later after a court order at Darian Cole's expense, $4,800 for removal and disposal, certified by the contractor and submitted to Edmund's attorneys. The house at 16 Sycamore Lane sold in August of 2020 at a price $61,000 below what Darian Cole had paid for it. The buyer was a retired schoolteacher and her husband who coached youth soccer. She sent Edmund a card before she moved in, introducing herself. Her name was Patricia. She had African violets on her windowsill. Edmund thought about that for a long time. You want to know what happened to Darian Cole? The FTC civil action against Praxis Data Group was settled in November of 2020. The company paid $2.1 million in penalties and was required to implement a comprehensive data compliance program under FTC oversight. Darian Cole was not charged criminally in the FTC action, but the investor disclosure issues, the material omissions, were separately investigated by the SEC. In February of 2021, Darian Cole agreed to a settlement that included a $340,000 personal fine, a 5-year bar from serving as an officer or director of any public company, and the disgorgement of $180,000 in compensation. Praxis Data Group, without its CEO and under the weight of the consent decree, lost its Series B investors by spring of 2021. The company was sold for parts in July. The Forbes mentions did not help. Darian Cole moved back to Fairfax. He took a position as a strategic advisor at a smaller firm. His LinkedIn profile was updated 6 times in 18 months. The civil suit Edmund filed was settled in December of 2019. Darian Cole's homeowners insurance paid $87,500 covering damages for the rose garden, the animal cruelty documentation, fence removal, and legal fees. Edmund used part of it to have the rose garden properly restored by a master gardener named Ruth Ellison, who sourced replacement cultivars as close to Dorothy's original selections as modern nursery stock allowed. The Queen Elizabeth climbing rose, the one Edmund had replaced after the black spot outbreak in 2016, was back in place by May. By June it had put out 3 blooms. Edmund photographed them. He printed one photo and put it in his notebook. On the last page he'd written anything about Darian Cole. Then he closed the notebook and put it in a drawer. He opened a new one. Calvin Reese came to visit that summer, driving up from Richmond in a battered pickup truck, and the two of them spent a Saturday afternoon in Edmund's woodshop talking about nothing in particular, the kind of conversation that only exists between men who have known each other in the worst circumstances and survived them. Patricia from next door brought sweet potato pie. She said it was her grandmother's recipe. Edmund tried it. He didn't say anything for a moment. My wife used to make this, he said finally. Patricia smiled. I know, she said. Mrs. Hendricks on Blue Ridge Court told me, that's why I made it. Edmund nodded. He looked out the kitchen window at the rose garden. The whole neighborhood had told her. Because that's the thing about a neighborhood that is actually a neighborhood, it remembers. It holds things, it passes them forward. Even the ones you thought were gone. I want to tell you something before we go. Edmund Gaines is in the way that all the best people are not remarkable for what he did. He didn't do anything that required special strength or special genius. He documented. He was patient. He called a friend. He let the truth do what truth, when properly handled, has always done. What made Edmund remarkable was what he didn't do. He didn't rage. He didn't retaliate. He didn't lower himself to the level of the man next door who had already decided that Edmund was not worth his attention. Because here's the thing about men like Darian Cole. They look at a man with a cane and a hearing aid and a birdhouse woodshop and a folder full of documents and they see weakness. They see someone who won't fight back. They see an easy mark. They don't understand, they cannot understand, what it actually means to have endured. A man who walked out of QU Letter 1EA3 and GTR Letter 1ECB province in 1969 on a leg rebuilt with titanium and surgical wire, who held the line through the desert and the drawdown and the long years after, who sat with his wife's roses through the frost and the black spot and the dying. That man is not weak. That man is not soft. That man has simply learned something that youth and money and a Stanford MBA cannot teach you. He has learned what is worth fighting for. And he has learned how to wait. You see, folks, there is a kind of man who is quiet because he has nothing to say. And there is another kind of man who is quiet because he has already said everything he needs to say in the right place at the right time to the right people. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak man. Never mistake patience for permission. And never ever pick a fight with a veteran who has nothing left to lose but his honor. Rest easy, Edmund. Dorothy would be proud. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.